Hi, welcome to the bathtub. You know me, I'm the old masturbator. You can call grandma, call the kids. It's all family friendly. We don't do anything your grandma hasn't seen before. This is the unpixelated water. We don't have any alcoholic beverages anymore while in the performance of our literary duties. We have no whiteboard. We don't do any of the tech anymore. We're pure, unadulterated, bookish, meaningless pleasure for me. Today we're going to talk about one of if I picked my one book, my one favorite novel to read in the bathtub, it's Madame Bovary. You can see this is a bit beat up, but I'll tell the story behind that in a minute. This is my preferred edition. I have my old modern library. Francis Steegmuller is often considered the best translator. I love the translation. I don't know whether it's the best or not. And we're gonna talk about this. The title of this talk is "Saving Madame Bovary from Herself," and there's a couple of reasons we're going to talk about that. I wanted to start with one of my pointless preambles, which is we at the bathtub, we don't endorse any type of reading or writing. Anything that makes you happy in the bathtub, we totally support it. We don't care if you agree with our opinions or don't disagree. We won't really have opinions. We just try to tell you what we enjoy in the bathtub. And if you don't like stuff, that's perfectly understandable. If you do like stuff, we don't. It's a big happy bathtub. We're all in it together. I want to, however, and we never try to make an argument that somebody should read something. I'm going to kind of come to the edge. I'm going to come to the edge of not doing that in a moment, which is that I'm going to talk a little bit about Madame Bovary as a sort of disappointment I've had is how many people don't like this book. It kind of surprises me every single time I think about Madame Bovary. I read it when I was in high school. The first time, Mr. Zimmerman, a very good, excellent teacher I had who I'd never showed any attention to. I was a terrible, terrible student in high school. And he got us to read Madame Bovary. And I remember him saying you should get the Steegmuller translation. And I just picked up whatever cheap copy was lying around the classroom. And I loved it. I was totally, I enjoyed it. I was 15, 16, just read almost nothing but crap at that time. I couldn't put down Madame Bovary. I loved it. I've read it every 8 to 10 years since then. And whatever translation I've read, I've enjoyed. I've kind of moved into the Steegmuller camp just because I was sort of told it was the best one. I think Mr. Zimmerman was the first who told me this. And then when I read it, I do really enjoy that one. But in the course of all lifetime of reading books, you meet people who like some things more than others. There's almost no one ever dislikes Nabokov, and they always seem to think everybody's an idiot if they don't like him. You can put up Tolstoy. There's always somebody who doesn't like Tolstoy. Dostoevsky, somebody doesn't like him. There's difference of opinions about what we like to read. I can't tell you how many people tell me they hate Madame Bovary. It just surprises me all the time. The last time I taught Madame Bovary was about 10 years ago. It was the last literature course I taught. I was at Kingston University, and I put Madame Bovary as a kind of a test case in the middle of the class. And I told everyone in the advanced word for the class, it was a pretty full class. We had 15 or 20 students. I told them to get the Steegmuller translation. And I went to the first class. I had like 15 or 20 nice, smart, good-looking kids in the class, very different backgrounds, basically cultural backgrounds, men and women. And I was expecting to have a nice little argument about who liked the book and who didn't. I went around the class and I asked everyone just to give me their own personal, just a readerly opinion of Madame Bovary. First of all, no one picked up the Steegmuller translation. Everyone picked up the Wordsworth Classic because it was 99 cents or something. So I don't care if it's what translation. It doesn't matter. Every single student in the class hated Madame Bovary. I was really surprised. It was the first time I'd ever noticed people didn't like Madame Bovary. I talked to many people who don't like Madame Bovary. That's fine. But I was expecting some people would like it, some people wouldn't. They all hated it. Most of them said, well, they didn't like it because she was an adulterer. And she cheated on her husband. And I kept thinking, well, that's literature. How many books about literature, from Ann Tyler to Tolstoy, have written about women who cheated on their husbands or men who cheated on their wives? So anyway, they were very, very bothered by it. And it really threw me off. It was kind of my last lit course, and I just thought, God, I don't want to teach literature anymore after this if I'm going to have to try to make people think that Madame Bovary is worth reading, even though she cheated on her husband. Anyway, so the other day, I pick up a lot of Kindle free books because of the old translations, just to see what they're like. I'm just going to read just a few of these. Now, I never make fun. I'm not making fun of any of these people, by the way. I actually like the reviews on Amazon. The readerly reviews. They seem to make much more sense to me than the New York Review of Boring, which publishes these endless boring reviews. I kind of like the reviews. But in this one, it was like so many negative reviews. This one says, I like the seller, but I hate Madame Bovary as a character. LOL. I would give her as a person 1 star, and that's just for existing. Here's another one. Ugh. These are the first ones that come up on the thing. I couldn't stand this book. Emma was a wretched, ungrateful woman. I can't stand people like her. I read it through even though I hated how she acted, hoping she would come to some tragic end as she deserved. I was really surprised by this. A wonderful novel. Okay, one person, there's a nice one. The third one's very positive. And then that we have a kind of, okay, just kind of, what the modern novel means to them, etc. Couldn't get through it. The only worst classic was Little Women. Our book club likes to read a classic every 4 choices, and this one came up. I may have paid $1 or so for it, which was way too much. Couldn't get through it. Finally, I've not yet read all the book. Everyone except one is a positive. There's one positive out of these top 10. This one gave 2 stars. 2 stars to Madame Bovary. I'm sorry. And here's 1 star. The book never made you care what would happen. This one was a bomb by the consensus of my book club. I have to say, I totally support book clubs. I think they're wonderful. They should all piss on Madame Bovary. They don't like it. But it did, when I went through this, I thought there's something going on in book clubs out there that doesn't like Madame Bovary. So anyway, that's a long preamble to say that I love Madame Bovary. I think she's terrific. I think she's a wonderful character. I love Flaubert all up and down. I love Flaubert's writing. I've just read I've talked about this before. I'm a big fan of Geoffrey Wall. He's translated a lot of Flaubert. He translated and wrote one of the best introductions to a classic edition of the selected letters of Flaubert, which really got me to become a fan of Wall. And I read this biography. It's fairly short. It's about 350 pages. It's really well written. I have to say, Flaubert really inspires good nonfiction writing. This is one of the best written biographies I've ever read. I just enjoyed it all the way through. I haven't picked up the Stigmiller. Stigmiller's got a kind of biography of him, which I want to read as well. And one of the things I did when I was reading this is I always read this. I have this kind of theory about Flaubert, which is that it doesn't matter what translation you get. He's so good, it comes through anyway. So instead of rereading this one in the past week or so, I picked up just whatever was at the local Phoenix bookshop, secondhand, totally beat up copy, a new translation by Mildred Marmer. It was new in probably the 50s. There's a wonderful introduction by Mary McCarthy, by the way, who wrote wonderful literary essays. And so I read this, and I just, I could see that Stigmiller writes these kind of nice, tidier, sharper, smarter sentences to some extent. But I couldn't. Every single paragraph was beautiful. I'm not going to read too much of it, but what you do know is that Madame Bovary is from being this horrible woman that some people seem to hate, is someone who has this great appreciation of beautiful things. It's part of it's a fantasy. She has this fantasy for romantic novels. She is kind of the paradigmatic bathtub character. She likes to spend time in the tub with a good book. You know this with Madame Bovary. It has to be beautiful. It has to move her. She has all the passion for language that Flaubert does. And Flaubert really hates the middle-class culture that she's coming from. So, yes, she's treated in a fairly cold, clear, sharp, but sympathetic point of view from Flaubert. And what he often... There's Dodo. Dodo's back. She's feeling good. He brings out this kind of desire for something beautiful in Madame Bovary. I just so many wonderful passages. I just want to read 1 or 2 quick ones. I'll give you one quick example. This is the first time now. It's told from, in some ways, the story's framed. This really confused me the first time I read it. By Charles Bovary, the aspiring doctor. He's a shy, lonely kid. The story opens with him going into his classroom and all the other boys making fun of him because he doesn't have nice clothes. I think all of us can identify if we haven't been in his shoes, which I can remember being in those shoes. Going into a new school, everyone looks at you like you're a bug on a plate. And it's kind of about his sense of disconnection from the world. And he becomes a doctor, and he really doesn't feel much. He gets into a really bad marriage, which thankfully for him, the woman dies. His mother gets him to marry some woman for money, and he actually meets a woman who he's passionate about. The whole book is about people who do things because they're supposed to. Marry, take a job, go live somewhere, go to a party, and the people who actually have some sort of passionate, intense feeling for what they do, like Flaubert for his books, and for Madame Bovary for something better than this really kind of boring life of hers. I just want to give a little quick example of just something he does early on the book. He's talking about how Charles first meets Madame Bovary by taking care of her father, who breaks his leg, I think, or hurts his leg. And while he's out there, he runs into Madame Bovary, or Emma, doing some knitting, and she's sewing some pads. And it says here, it was extremely simple fracture, so he's treating the father, with no complications whatsoever. Charles couldn't have wished for an easier one. Then, remembering the bedside manners of his teachers, he comforted the patient with all sorts of kind words. Medical caresses like the oil used on scalpels. A bundle of lathes to be used for splints was brought up from the cart shed. Charles selected one from the pack, cut it in pieces, and planed it with a piece of broken glass while the maid was ripping sheets to make bandages. Mademoiselle Emma, the daughter, was about to sew some pads. Her father became impatient when it took too long to find her workbox. She made no comment. But as she sewed, she pricked her fingers and then put them in her mouth to suck them. End of paragraph. New paragraph. Charles was surprised at the whiteness of her nails. They gleamed, were finely tapered, cleaner than Dieppe ivories, and almond-shaped. Now that's just one simple random little shift. It's a very famous passage where she sucks the blood. It shows us a passionate, natural feeling for Emma, for life. But what's wonderful is not just her sucking the fingers, but cutting straight to Charles looking at her fingers, and the paleness of the fingers, and the almond-shaped. Every single visual has got sensual, physical, emotional beauty, and every sentence, every paragraph just vibrates with this sort of intensity. He feels passionate for her. She thinks she feels passionate for him, and then she goes home with him, and they kind of had a courtship, and she finally thinks, I finally found someone to take me out of this incredibly boring world of, farmers and selling goats and making milk and stuff. I just wanted to read one passage here. Actually, I'm going to stop this. I don't think these should go on more than 13, 14 minutes. I'm going to stop this and I'll do a second part of this, and then we'll finish up. But that's, if you want to hear a little bit more, a couple more passages from Madame Bovary, one of my all-time favorite novels. I'll read them in a minute, and I'm going to take a break now. But definitely give the book a try, and listen to part 2 if you feel like it. Thanks.